The arrogance in Ragnar Hutchinson's voice was unmistakable as he dismissed the quiet mechanic working beneath his Harley. "Just keep your head down and fix the damn bike," he told her, his Iron Serpent's vest catching the afternoon light streaming through the garage windows. His fellow bikers chuckled as they watched the small woman in grease-stained coveralls struggle with their leader's massive Road King. What none of them knew was that the toolbox beside her contained more than wrenches and screwdrivers. Hidden beneath a false bottom lay a federal badge that would change everything they thought they knew about the unassuming repair shop owner. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoyed this story, consider subscribing for more tales of unsung heroes and moments when truth silences arrogance. But let me take you back to where this all began. 6 months earlier, when a woman calling herself Serafina Valdez first rolled into the dusty town of Millbrook. The moving truck disappeared around the corner, leaving Serafina Valdez standing alone in front of what would become Precision Motors. The weathered building looked exactly as described in the intelligence briefings. 2 repair bays, a small office, and an apartment upstairs that would serve as both home and command center for the most dangerous assignment of her 15-year DEA career. What the residents of Millbrook didn't know was that their new neighbor held advanced degrees in mechanical engineering and criminal justice from Stanford. What they couldn't have imagined was that she had spent the last decade infiltrating drug trafficking organizations across 3 continents, always disappearing before anyone suspected her true identity. The Iron Serpent's motorcycle club controlled this stretch of California highway like feudal lords, their criminal empire stretching from Los Angeles to Portland. Local law enforcement had been either corrupted or intimidated into compliance, creating the perfect environment for their methamphetamine distribution network to flourish unchecked. Serafina's mission was simple in concept, deadly in execution: infiltrate the organization, gather evidence of their criminal activities, and dismantle their operation from within. Her cover as a divorced mechanic seeking a quiet life was designed to appear vulnerable and non-threatening, the perfect camouflage for someone trained to take down entire criminal enterprises. Now, 6 months later, that careful preparation was about to be tested. Ragnar Hutchinson's boots echoed across the concrete floor as he circled Serafina's workbench like a predator evaluating prey. At 47, he carried himself with the casual menace of someone who'd learned that intimidation could substitute for intelligence. His weathered face bore the permanent scowl of a man who'd spent decades believing the world owed him respect he'd never earned. "You sure you know what you're doing under there?" he asked, his tone carrying just enough condescension to establish dominance without crossing into open hostility. "This ain't some piece of junk pickup truck." Serafina didn't look up from the fuel injection system she was cleaning, her movements precise and confident despite Ragnar's looming presence. "Been working on Harleys since I was 16, she replied, her voice carrying the weary patience of someone accustomed to men questioning her competence. "Your bike'll run better than it has in years when I'm finished." But there was so much more to this story than a simple motorcycle repair. 3 years earlier, DEA intelligence had identified the Iron Serpents as a priority target after a series of methamphetamine overdoses were traced to their distribution network. Traditional investigation methods had failed repeatedly, blocked by corruption that reached deep into local government and law enforcement. The decision to deploy a deep cover operative had been controversial, requiring authorization from the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Serafina Valdez had volunteered for the assignment, despite warnings about its unprecedented dangers. Her psychological profile indicated an almost supernatural ability to maintain cover identities under extreme pressure, combined with mechanical aptitude that made her civilian persona believable. What her handlers didn't fully understand was the personal motivation driving her dedication to this particular mission. 7 years ago, Serafina's younger sister had died from a methamphetamine overdose in a Phoenix emergency room. The drugs had been traced to a distribution network with connections to the Iron Serpents, but jurisdictional complications and lack of evidence had prevented prosecution. This assignment represented more than professional duty for Serafina. It was personal justice delayed, but not denied. Now, as Ragnar continued his territorial display above her prone form, she fought to control the rage that threatened to compromise her carefully constructed facade. Every condescending word reminded her why she'd spent 6 months building this identity, why she endured the daily humiliation of being dismissed and underestimated by the very criminals she was working to destroy. "What's taking so long?" Zephyr Blackwood demanded as he entered the garage, his sergeant-at-arms patch announcing his status within the Iron Serpent's hierarchy. Intelligence reports described him as violent and unpredictable, with a criminal record that included aggravated assault and weapons charges. Ragnar's been waiting over an hour for his bike. Serafina emerged from beneath the motorcycle, wiping her hands on a shop rag while maintaining the submissive body language expected of someone in her supposed position. Fuel system was dirtier than expected, she explained, avoiding direct eye contact with Zephyr. Should be ready in about 20 minutes. But Zephyr wasn't satisfied with her explanation. He moved closer, invading her personal space with the casual aggression of a predator testing boundaries. "Maybe the problem isn't the bike," he suggested, his voice carrying an undertone of threat. "Maybe the problem is having some outsider working on club business." The tension in the garage was palpable as other Iron Serpent's members drifted in, drawn by the possibility of conflict. Serafina recognized several faces from her intelligence briefings. Career criminals with extensive records who viewed violence as a first resort rather than a last option. This was the moment her cover would either solidify or collapse catastrophically. What happened next would surprise everyone present, including Serafina herself. She straightened to her full height, meeting Zephyr's gaze directly for the first time since he'd entered the garage. "I understand your concern," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "But insulting my work isn't going to get Ragnar's bike fixed any faster." The garage fell silent. In the Iron Serpent's world, challenging a sergeant-at-arms could have fatal consequences, especially for an outsider with no protection or status within their organization. Serafina had just crossed a line that most people wouldn't dare approach. Zephyr's hand moved instinctively toward the knife on his belt, muscle memory from decades of violent responses to perceived disrespect. But something in Serafina's posture gave him pause, a quiet confidence that suggested she wasn't as vulnerable as she appeared. "You got some balls, lady," Zephyr admitted after a moment that felt like hours. "Most people around here know better than to talk back to me." "I'm not most people," Serafina replied simply. "I'm someone who guarantees her work and doesn't appreciate being accused of incompetence by people who couldn't rebuild an engine if their lives depended on it." What the Iron Serpents didn't know was that Serafina's confidence came from more than mechanical expertise. Before joining the DEA, she had served 3 tours in Afghanistan as an Army Special Forces communications specialist, operating in hostile territory where showing weakness meant death. The motorcycle club members surrounding her were dangerous criminals, but they weren't trained soldiers who'd survived actual combat. Ragnar stepped forward, sensing the need to defuse a situation that could spiral out of control. "Zephyr, let her work," he said, his tone carrying enough authority to override his sergeant-at-arms. "Bike's been running like shit for weeks. If she can fix it, I don't care what she says while she's doing it." The moment passed, but its significance wasn't lost on anyone present. The quiet mechanic had faced down one of the most feared members of the Iron Serpents and emerged with her dignity intact. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish, possibly both. As the bikers drifted back to their conversations, Serafina returned to her work beneath Ragnar's motorcycle, but now she was listening more carefully to their discussions, picking up fragments of information about routes and shipments, suppliers and distribution networks. The intelligence she was gathering would eventually bring down their entire organization, though none of them suspected the danger they were casually revealing. "Heard from Baltazar yesterday," one of the prospects mentioned, trying to impress the full members with his access to important information. "Says the supply situation down south is stabilizing, might be able to increase our orders for summer." Zephyr's response was sharp and immediate. "Keep your fucking voice down," he hissed. "You never know who might be listening." His warning came too late. Serafina had already catalogued the name, the seasonal reference, and the implication of expanded operations. Baltazar was likely their primary supplier, possibly connected to Mexican cartels based on the Down South reference. The mention of summer expansion suggested they were planning to capitalize on increased demand during tourist season. 20 minutes later, she had Ragnar's motorcycle running with the smooth power it hadn't displayed in months. The repair was genuinely impressive, demonstrating mechanical competence that earned grudging respect from even the most skeptical club members. "Damn!" Ragnar admitted as he revved the engine, listening to its smooth response. "Hasn't run this good since I bought it." "Told you I guarantee my work," Serafina replied, beginning to clean her tools with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. "That'll be 400 for parts and labor." Ragnar peeled bills from a roll that contained far more cash than most people carried for routine expenses, another indicator of the Iron Serpent's financial success from their criminal activities. "Keep the change," he said, handing her $500. Good work deserves good pay. But there was more to Ragnar's generosity than simple appreciation. After the Iron Serpents departed, their engines echoing down Main Street like thunder announcing a storm, Serafina locked the garage doors and activated the sophisticated security system she'd installed during her first week in town. To casual observation, it appeared to be standard commercial equipment purchased from a local company. In reality, it was a surveillance network that monitored every approach to the building while maintaining encrypted communication with her handlers at the DEA field office in Sacramento. Her apartment above the shop reinforced her cover identity as someone starting over with limited resources, sparse furniture, basic appliances, everything suggesting financial constraint. But the second bedroom told a different story entirely. Multiple computers, communication devices, and surveillance equipment filled custom-built cabinets that appeared to be ordinary storage furniture. Serafina activated her secure laptop and began composing her daily intelligence report, documenting every detail of her interaction with the Iron Serpents. The information would be cross-referenced with ongoing investigations and added to the growing database of evidence that would eventually support federal prosecutions. 3 months into her assignment, the intelligence picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. The Iron Serpents operated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that went far beyond simple drug dealing. Money laundering operations, political corruption, intimidation of witnesses, and connections to organized crime groups in multiple states painted a picture of systematic criminality that threatened the safety of entire communities. But Serafina's mission was entering its most dangerous phase. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Special Agent Vesper Thornfield, her handler in Sacramento. The brief text contained a single word that made her blood run cold: compromised. Someone within the Iron Serpents organization had become suspicious of her presence in Millbrook. Whether through leaked information, routine background checks, or simple paranoia, her cover identity was under investigation. The carefully constructed persona of Serafina Valdez, divorced mechanic seeking a quiet life, might not withstand determined scrutiny by people with both criminal experience and access to resources. Serafina immediately activated her emergency protocols, beginning the process of securing sensitive materials while preparing for possible rapid extraction. The intelligence she'd gathered over 6 months was sufficient to support federal prosecution, but losing her would eliminate the possibility of gathering evidence about the organization's highest levels of operation. Her secure communication system chimed with an update from Agent Thornfield. "Ragnar Hutchinson ran your social security number through a private investigation service 3 hours ago. Results showed minor inconsistencies in employment history. Status: evaluate and respond." The news confirmed Serafina's worst fears. Her cover identity had been crafted carefully, but no false persona could withstand unlimited scrutiny by determined investigators with criminal connections. She had perhaps 24 hours before the Iron Serpents would have enough information to expose her federal identity. But Serafina Valdez hadn't survived 15 years of undercover operations by panicking under pressure. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Precision Motors. Serafina was working beneath a customer's pickup truck when she heard the distinctive sound of a single motorcycle approaching. Not the usual pack behavior of the Iron Serpents, but someone riding alone. She rolled out from under the vehicle to find Zephyr Blackwood standing in her doorway, his posture radiating controlled menace. Unlike his previous visits with other club members, this encounter felt different, more personal, more dangerous. "We need to talk," he announced, stepping inside without invitation and closing the door behind him. Serafina maintained her cover personality despite the adrenaline surge triggered by his obvious hostility. "Sure," she replied, wiping her hands on a shop rag while calculating distances to potential weapons and escape routes. "What's on your mind?" "Ragnar's been asking questions about you," Zephyr said, circling her workbench like a predator stalking prey. "Seems your story doesn't add up quite right when you dig into the details." The accusation hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that could prove fatal if handled incorrectly. Serafina's training screamed warnings about the deteriorating tactical situation, but her mission objectives required maintaining cover as long as possible. "What kind of details?" she asked, projecting the confused irritation of someone whose privacy had been violated, rather than the calculated assessment of a federal agent whose cover was blown. "Like why a mechanic with your skills ended up in a small town instead of making real money in Phoenix," Zephyr replied. "Like why there's no record of you working at the shop you claim trained you. Like why your divorce papers show a different maiden name than what you put on your business license application." Each revelation struck like a physical blow, confirming that her cover identity was unraveling rapidly under determined investigation. The inconsistencies Zephyr mentioned were subtle but fatal, the kind of details that seemed unimportant during persona construction but proved critical when subjected to hostile scrutiny. "I don't know what you're talking about," Serafina said, but even she could hear the weakness in her denial. Zephyr's hand moved to the pistol concealed beneath his leather jacket. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Federal Agent." The words shattered any remaining pretense between them. Her cover was blown completely, leaving Serafina facing an armed criminal who'd discovered her federal identity. The situation had deteriorated from dangerous to potentially lethal in a matter of seconds, but what happened next would shock Zephyr more than her true identity ever could. Instead of panic or desperate attempts at deception, Serafina's entire demeanor transformed. The submissive mechanic vanished, replaced by someone whose posture and presence radiated professional competence and controlled violence. Her hand moved with practiced speed toward her own concealed weapon, while her eyes locked onto Zephyr's with predatory intensity. "Agent Serafina Valdez, DEA Special Operations Division," she announced, her voice carrying authority that filled the small garage. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, and racketeering." Zephyr's hand froze on his pistol as he realized the tables had turned completely. The vulnerable woman he'd come to intimidate had become someone infinitely more dangerous than anyone he'd faced in decades of criminal violence. "The fuck you are," he snarled, beginning to draw his weapon. Serafina's gun was already in her hand, trained on center mass with the steady precision of someone who'd survived firefights in Afghanistan before transitioning to federal law enforcement. "Drop it, Zephyr. This garage is surrounded by federal agents who've been listening to everything you just said." It wasn't true, yet, but Serafina's communication device was transmitting their conversation to Sacramento, where Agent Thornfield was coordinating tactical response teams that were still 40 minutes away from Millbrook. She needed to control the situation until backup arrived. Zephyr's eyes darted around the garage, looking for escape routes or tactical advantages. His hand remained on his partially drawn pistol, caught between aggression and self-preservation as he processed this impossible reversal of fortune. 6 months, Serafina continued, her weapon never wavering from its target. 6 months I've been gathering evidence about your organization. Drug shipments, money laundering, political corruption, witness intimidation. I've got recordings of conversations, financial records, supplier information. The Iron Serpents are finished, Zephyr." "You're bluffing," he replied, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Baltazar Moreno, your primary supplier from the Sinaloa cartel," Serafina recited from memory. "Ships product through Tijuana to Los Angeles, then north through your distribution network. Summer expansion includes 3 new routes through Sacramento, Fresno, and Bakersfield. Monthly gross income approximately $2.4 million, with 60% flowing through businesses you control in 5 counties. The color drained from Zephyr's face as he realized the scope of intelligence she possessed. Information he'd assumed was protected by careful operational security had been compromised by the mechanic he'd dismissed as a harmless civilian. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Since day one," Serafina replied. "Every conversation, every repair job, every casual comment about routes and suppliers. I've been building a federal case that will put most of your organization in prison for the rest of your natural lives." But their confrontation was interrupted by the sound of multiple motorcycles approaching at high speed. Ragnar Hutchinson led 6 Iron Serpents members into the garage, their aggressive entry suggesting they'd come prepared for violence. Zephyr's failure to return from his reconnaissance mission had triggered organizational security protocols that assumed the worst about his fate. "Let him go," Ragnar ordered, his own weapon drawn as he assessed the tactical situation. Serafina found herself outnumbered 7-1, surrounded by armed criminals in an environment where backup was still 30 minutes away. Her training provided clear guidance about such scenarios: survive until reinforcement arrives, minimize casualties, gather additional intelligence if possible. "Federal agents are en route," she announced loudly enough for her communication device to transmit clearly. "Surrender now, and you might avoid additional charges for threatening a federal officer." Ragnar's laugh was devoid of humor. "Ain't no federal agents coming, lady. We've got people monitoring police communications for 50 miles around Millbrook. You're on your own." The revelation confirmed Serafina's intelligence about corruption reaching into local law enforcement and communication networks. The Iron Serpents had invested heavily in early warning systems that protected their criminal operations from traditional police investigation. "Maybe so," Serafina acknowledged. "But killing a federal agent brings attention you can't buy your way out of. Every alphabet agency in the country will come down on this town like the wrath of God." "Not if your body never gets found," Zephyr suggested, having recovered some of his composure now that reinforcements had arrived. But Serafina had one final card to play. "Automated dead man's switch," she announced, indicating the communication device on her workbench. "If I don't check in every 12 hours, encrypted files containing all intelligence gathered during this operation get transmitted to FBI headquarters, DEA command, and major news organizations simultaneously." It was a bluff, but a sophisticated one based on genuine federal protocols. The Iron Serpents had no way to verify her claim without risking exposure of their entire operation if she was telling the truth. Ragnar studied her with the calculating assessment of someone who'd survived decades in criminal enterprises by correctly evaluating risks and opportunities. The woman pointing a gun at his sergeant-at-arms represented the greatest threat their organization had ever faced, but killing her might trigger consequences that would destroy everything they'd built. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Safe passage out of town," Serafina replied immediately. "I disappear, you pretend this conversation never happened, everyone goes home alive. And the intelligence you gathered? Gets buried so deep it never sees daylight." She lied smoothly. "I came here for one specific target, got what I needed, no interest in bringing down your entire organization." The negotiation was interrupted by the distant sound of helicopter rotors approaching from the east. Agent Thornfield had been monitoring Serafina's communication device from Sacramento, coordinating federal response to her compromised situation. The tactical team approaching Millbrook included DEA special agents, FBI hostage rescue specialists, and U.S. Marshals with jurisdiction over fugitive apprehension. "Sounds like your backup just arrived," Ragnar observed grimly. "Last chance," Serafina announced. "Surrender now and live to stand trial. Fight federal agents and you'll be dead before sunset." The next few minutes would determine whether 6 months of dangerous undercover work resulted in successful prosecution of a major criminal enterprise or a violent confrontation that could claim multiple lives on both sides. Ragnar's decision surprised everyone present. "Stand down," he ordered his men, his voice carrying absolute authority within the Iron Serpent's hierarchy. "Weapons on the ground, hands visible. Nobody moves without my command." The bikers complied reluctantly, recognizing their leader's assessment of a tactical situation that had deteriorated beyond their ability to control. Federal agencies approaching with helicopter support and legal jurisdiction meant their options had narrowed to surrender or death. "Smart choice," Serafina acknowledged, maintaining her weapon's aim while backing toward the garage entrance where she could meet the incoming tactical team. The helicopters were circling overhead now, their rotor wash stirring dust clouds that reduced visibility, while federal agents fast roped to positions surrounding the garage. Professional voices echoed across radio frequencies as the operation transitioned from covert surveillance to overt law enforcement action. "This is Special Agent Thornfield," came the amplified voice from outside. "The building is surrounded. Federal agents are prepared to enter. Anyone inside who is not a law enforcement officer should exit immediately with hands visible." Serafina backed toward the door, her weapon still trained on the Iron Serpent's members who watched with expressions ranging from resignation to barely controlled rage. 6 months of careful persona construction had ended in a matter of hours, but the intelligence she'd gathered would dismantle their criminal empire. Agent Valdez exiting the building. She called out as she reached the doorway. Multiple suspects inside, weapons on ground, situation contained. Tactical teams swarmed the garage within seconds, their professional efficiency transforming chaos into controlled arrests. Ragnar Hutchinson, Zephyr Blackwood, and 5 other Iron Serpent's members were secured with tactical restraints, while agents secured weapons and began processing the scene for evidence. "You played that perfectly," Agent Thornfield said as she approached Serafina's position. "Intelligence intercepts suggest they were planning to eliminate you tonight. Extraction came just in time." But Serafina was already thinking about the broader implications. The arrests at Precision Motors represented only the beginning of a coordinated federal operation targeting the Iron Serpent's criminal enterprise. Intelligence gathered during her 6-month assignment had identified dozens of suspects across multiple states, financial assets subject to federal forfeiture, and corruption networks that reached into local government and law enforcement. Over the following weeks, simultaneous raids dismantled the organization's operational capacity, while prosecutors prepared cases that would likely result in lengthy federal prison sentences for most participants. The methamphetamine distribution network that had operated with impunity for over a decade ceased to exist within a matter of days. Serafina's testimony before federal grand juries provided crucial evidence linking the Iron Serpents to organized crime groups, political corruption, and violent crimes that extended far beyond drug trafficking. Her detailed intelligence reports became the foundation for prosecutions that would continue for years as federal authorities worked to unravel the full scope of criminal activities. But justice carried personal costs that few would ever understand. 3 months later, Serafina sat in a Denver coffee shop reading newspaper coverage of the Iron Serpent's trials. The articles described successful federal prosecutions that had dismantled a sophisticated criminal enterprise, but they made no mention of the undercover agent whose dangerous work had made those victories possible. Ragnar Hutchinson had been sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Zephyr Blackwood received 25 years for his role in the organization's violent enforcement activities. Dozens of other defendants faced sentences ranging from probation to life imprisonment, depending on their level of involvement in the criminal conspiracy. What the newspaper articles couldn't capture was the psychological toll of spending 6 months surrounded by people who would have killed her without hesitation if they discovered her true identity. The constant vigilance, careful character maintenance, and suppression of natural reactions had left scars that wouldn't heal quickly. Serafina Valdez had served justice in ways the public would never know, dismantling a criminal empire while protecting communities throughout Central California from the violence and addiction that had claimed her sister's life years earlier. The work continued in shadows and silence, carried out by people whose dedication to justice transcended recognition or reward. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from Agent Thornfield. New assignment available. Deep cover operation. Estimated duration 12 to 18 months. High priority target. Interested? Serafina closed the newspaper and finished her coffee, considering the offer. Somewhere in America, another criminal organization was operating with impunity, believing they were beyond the reach of federal law enforcement. They were wrong. "Send me the briefing materials," she typed in response. The work of protecting innocent people from those who would exploit or harm them never ended. Neither did the dedication of those who chose to serve in shadows, carrying out missions that others would never understand or acknowledge. Serafina Valdez disappeared into the Denver morning crowd, already becoming someone new for her next assignment. The quiet mechanic from Millbrook existed now only in court records and classified files, another identity shed like winter clothing when the season changed. But the justice she had served would endure long after her name was forgotten.